everyone, hope you're all having a wonderful day today. As you can tell by the title of this video, we are looking at one of the most budget optics on the market, and I haven't really done one of these in a while. Lately my videos have been a little bit more on nicer products, more mid-range products, but this is kind of taking it back a little bit. This is a very budget-oriented optic from Feyachi. This is the Feyachi Falcon 1-4. I may or may not be pronouncing that correctly, but before we get into the video, if you'd like to support the channel in any way, you can like, share, and subscribe, because that stuff is of course free and doesn't cost you anything. On top of that, we have targets that I sell from my own company. The website is the first link in the description. On top of that, there is Subscribestar, which is a monthly subscription service, kind of like Patreon. You get a lot of extra free content, and you get entered in really cool giveaways, and this is probably going to be one of those giveaways. So for as little as $2 a month, you can enter into a giveaway for free. Of course, once you're in there, you don't need to do anything. It's just automatically entered, and you get some really cool stuff. So it will pay for itself in no time. Now, on top of that, I do want to mention that I did not pay for this at all. Feyachi reached out to me. I've reviewed some of their other stuff. The last thing that I reviewed was actually that kind of strange 1.5 to 5x magnifier, which actually was okay, but again, kind of a more gimmicky product. And today we're going to be talking about a 1-4, a fairly straightforward LPVO. But again, I did not pay anything for it. They sent it out to the channel. I will have a link to this in the description as well. It will be going on some really good discounts for Black Friday, which is coming up in a couple weeks. So that will also be linked in the description. If you use that link, I do not make any money off of it whatsoever. I don't use Amazon affiliate links. And if you use the extra code for 10% off, I also don't make any money off of that. So I have absolutely no money in the game because I did not spend any of my own money, and I don't make any money off of this. So really quickly, let's go ahead and go through some of the specs. So basically it's a 30mm tube, which is good. It's better than 1 inch. The price point right now is $100, though as I mentioned in Black Friday, I believe it's going to be going down to $90 plus the discount code, so it'll be around $80 on or around Black Friday. But $100 is its regular price, which again is about the cheapest LPVO on the market. The only one that comes close is this guy. This is the UTG 1-8. This one here specifically is the circle dot, which is like 130 bucks generally speaking, so it's still a little more expensive, but it has a little bit nicer features, I would say. But this is about the bottom end. So on top of that, it is hard coat anodized aluminum, or Chinesium, because of course these are all made in China, as well as all of these other scopes behind me, which we'll also talk about in a minute. The length is just under 10 inches, and in terms of weight, it's around 17 ounces. So that actually puts it pretty much perfectly with the primary arms 1-6. It is nearly identical in terms of size and weight, which is nice. They're both some of the lightest and smallest 1-6s or LPVOs on the market. Now again, remember this one here is only a 1-4. So in terms of size, weight, and exterior, it's actually really nice. It does have cap turrets, which have really good knurling. On top of that, there are 3 raised sections. I don't know if you can really see that on there, but there are 3 raised sections on the outside of the caps, which is really nice. The clicks on top of that are very crisp. Like, they are not mushy whatsoever. They're very crisp. Now, I didn't do any sort of round robin test on it to make sure that they tracked properly, but it was very easy to zero. So I don't think you're going to have any real issues with that. And again, you're not going to be using these the turrets for anything other than zeroing. The illumination, another really nice thing that actually none of these LPVOs have, which are all 2 to 3 times as expensive, sometimes more. This one has an on and an off setting in between its illumination. So the illumination goes from 1 to 6, and it has an off setting in between each setting. So if you're, for whatever reason, you're doing some night hunting or some low light and you want to say use it at setting 4, you can just turn it off until you're ready to shoot, then push it up to 4. You know, you're 1 click away at that point, and it goes right to the setting that you want. On top of that, one thing that I will say about it, which happens a lot when you're dealing with budget optics, is I left it on max brightness for about 2 days accidentally, and it kind of, I don't want to say burnt out the emitter, but it definitely made the emitter a little bit more dim. So originally when I got it at 6x, it was actually daylight visible, not super hot, but definitely daylight visible at 6. But then after leaving it on for a couple days, right now it is really hot inside, but when you go outside with it in full daylight, the 6, it will barely tint the reticle red. Now again, if you don't leave it on for 2 days straight, that won't happen to you. but of course I did, and it kind of dimmed the emitter a little bit, just leaving it on the max brightness for 2 days straight. So other than that, the brightness does work, and if even right now with its dimmed emitter, if you were going to be taking it out in low light shooting, not necessarily dark shooting, but like low light shooting or overcast shooting, it works really well for that. One thing that I do actually want to praise the Feyachi Falcon for is that even though it's only $100, its glass is nearly identical to the primary arms 1:6, the Strike Eagle 1:6, the Vortex, this is the Gen 2 version, and of course the Swamp Fox Tomahawk 1:6. Both of these, or I should say all 4 of these LPVOs have nearly identical quality glass. So when looking through this, in low light situations, a lot of the shooting was done in more of an overcast, because it's winter time here, so it's getting very dark very early. So shooting at about 4:30, 5 o'clock, which means that the sun is pretty much down at that point, and it's very easy, very fast to pick up targets. So the glass is actually on par with a lot of other optics that are manufactured in China. The reason for that is that almost all of the glass is manufactured in the same facility from the same people. So these different companies are basically buying an optic, buying the glass, having it assembled, doing all that sort of stuff. And so the glass is functionally identical to a lot of other LPVOs. Now, other manufacturers will call out different coatings, and so they can have better contrast and better edge-to-edge clarity, but I'm really impressed for the money with the glass quality on this, and it will not be disappointing. It's not opaque in any way. It actually is fairly decent, especially compared to, again, much more expensive optics, and that's, again, because basically all of the glass is identical with some variations depending on what they call out their spec to in terms of how it's being ground and the coatings and all of that sort of fun stuff. So now let's go ahead and talk about the reticle itself. Now, I think if you're using a 1:4 or a 1:6, I prefer second focal plane, and I prefer the reticles to be simple and more catered to up close shooting. Now, a lot of these other reticles out here will be really good for taking it out to 500-600 yards, but on a 1:4, I don't really care about that all that much, and honestly, 95% of my shooting takes place within 50 yards. So for me, the most important thing is its 1x usability. So it needs to be precise, but it also needs to be fast enough to where, it's large enough to where you can pick it up very quickly. So they did a really good job on this. It's basically a somewhat hybridized EOTech style reticle. You have a very hot center dot, which is 1 MOA. You have an outer circle, which is probably somewhere around 30 MOA. And then you have 4 lines coming out left, right, up, or down that are fairly large as well. Now, one downside to the reticle is that even though it is very fast up close, and I really do like it for up close shooting, even with the illumination not on or very, very dim, just the fact that it's really big and really grabs your attention means that you can still run it really fast up close, which is really nice. A lot of other reticles are really thin, and so without the illumination, they are basically useless because it's really hard to pick them up, especially against a dark background. So one thing that I do like about this is that it is still very easy to pick up. Now, on top of that, one thing that is a downside is that it does not have any sort of BDC. So if you're trying to use it at 400 or 500 yards, you're going to have a really hard time with it until you figure out where you need to be holding over. And of course, it doesn't have any windage. So if you're using like 223 or something like that in heavy winds out to like 400 or 500 yards, good luck with that. It's not impossible to do, but of course, it's not going to be easy to do within the reticle. But that's a drawback of it, but I don't think most people who are buying 1:4s are trying to stretch them out beyond 300 yards. If you're using a 50 to 200 yard zero, you're of course just using the center dot, and then for 300 yards, you're holding about 20 inches above the target, depending on your target size, all that sort of good stuff. So for 0 to 300 yards, I think it is very, very usable, and you can of course always stretch it further depending on your gun and your personal capabilities. Now let's go ahead and talk about the eye box and the eye relief, which is actually another highlight of this optic. You have right at 4 inches of eye relief on top of that. So right now I'm getting a very, very good sight picture on 1x, and on top of that you have a very, very forgiving eye box. So what I mean by that is left, right, up, and down has a lot of room where you can move your head, which means again it lends itself to being very fast up close because you have a very fast reticle, you have good eye relief, and on top of that you have a very forgiving eye box. So you have about maybe a little bit under an inch up, down, left to right, which is actually, it doesn't sound like much, but that is a lot of space where your head can be and still see the reticle and still see your target, which of course is very important on an LPVO because you are essentially looking down a tube. Now, another nice thing about this optic is that the field of view at 100 yards is actually really good. It's 105 feet, which doesn't, it's not anything spectacular. All of these scopes, except for the UTG, are a little better. They're all anywhere from 110 to 115 at 100 yards, which is really good in my opinion. But 105 is definitely not bad. So the eye box, the eye relief, the field of view are all really, really good. Now, in terms of testing, I think we're at about 400 rounds of 7.62 by 39. I think I maybe put 20 rounds of 5.56 through it, but most of the time it's been on my 10.5 300, or sorry, 10.5 7.62 by 39 AR platform gun that we'll be doing a review on soon. But it held up to it very, very well. So it has been on 1-0 the entire time. So basically, I zeroed it at 50 yards with the 7.62 by 39. I put about 400 rounds through it, and I did its drop test, which we'll talk about in just a second, and the entire time was off of 1-0 on one mount. So the mount that I was using was actually an AIM Sports 175 mount, which is not a very expensive mount. It's like 25 bucks, and it's a little bit taller than your standard 1.5 mount, so it makes this optic even faster because you don't, of course, have to get your head down. You can keep your head up, which is a lot easier in my opinion, and I like the 175, the 193, the higher mounts. I think they do provide a lot of advantages up close. For long range shooting, maybe not so much, but again, it really depends what you're using your optics for, what guns that are on, all that sort of stuff. So 1-0 and no optic shift, or sorry, no zero shift. So you'll see when I do the drop test, I do 3 rounds at 50 yards and it's just barely high right, which I never get my zeros perfectly right because I shoot a lot of different guns and I'm not really taking them out to extreme long ranges, especially when I'm doing close-up reviews, that sort of thing. And then I did a double drop test on it onto rocks with a few layers of tarp in between it. I did a double drop test. I believe it's on my 10.5 gun, so not a super heavy gun, so there's not a lot of weight to absorb the shock. So actually a lot of that shock gets transferred into the optic itself. So I did the double drop test, fired 3 more rounds, and I got about 2 MOA of shift. So it shifted about 1 inch down and left at 50 yards, which is 2 inches of shift at 100 yards. So about 2 MOA, maybe a little bit less than 2 MOA of overall shift. But again, inside of 300 yards, even a 2 MOA shift will not shift you off of a man-sized target. If you're shooting like a 6-inch plate, then yeah, that will absolutely shift you off and mess you up, but it's not a very big shift. And for a really inexpensive scope, that is really, really good. Now, Feyachi does actually have a lifetime warranty on these, so if you were to break it in any way, as long as it's not intentional, like mine was intentional obviously because I did drop it, they will of course send you a new one as long as you can send it back to them. So $400 optic, that's really, really good. Now, one downside is that after I did the double drop test, I noticed that at 4x, so when it was cranked up to maximum magnification, the parallax setting had somewhat shifted. So basically there's a tube on the inside here, inside of your actual tube, that shifts forward and backwards, which gives you your magnification, and I believe the parallax is set at 100 yards. When I did the double drop test, something inside shifted slightly and the parallax shifted from 100 yards to 25 yards. So that meant at 4x, when I was doing my 50-yard confirmation shots, the target was a little bit blurry, and the further out you go, the more blurry it gets. So it had shifted to the point where now you could use it at 100, 200 yards, but it would be very, very difficult because it is now, the parallax has shifted on it, so that point of focus is now much, much closer, which means that longer shots are going to be even more out of focus. So up close, it's still perfectly fine. 1x, you don't notice it at all, and it works really, really well, but it did shift at 4x. Now, I have had much more expensive scopes after the double drop test shift their parallax, not calling anyone out specifically, but I have had a lot more expensive scopes fail the double drop test much worse than this $100 optic. And again, it does have a lifetime warranty, so if you could say, oh hey, it just happened during recoil or whatever, they would send you a new one. So, and on top of that, the zero did not really shift. Again, about 2 MOA, which is perfectly acceptable for me, maybe not for a true duty gun or a precision rifle or something like that, but for, again, what I consider a fun plinking target scope, a really, really good job. One other downside that I do want to mention real fast is that the throw is really long. So from 1x to 4x, you would think it's going to be 180 degrees because it doesn't have to go that far, but it's actually like 270 degrees. So it has a long way that you need to rotate the magnification ring to actually get up to your max magnification. That being said, 99% of the time it's going to be on probably 1x, and 4x is not that much different. It doesn't give you all that much magnification. It does help when you're going 200, 300, 400 yards, but again, with this reticle, you're probably not really going to be doing that. I do think 1 to 4x is a good magnification range, and it's a really good sort of training scope, which we'll get into in a minute. If you want to give somebody a scope and allow them to train and get used to using an LPVO and just getting used to the eye boxes, again, it's a really nice eye box, getting used to using an LPVO up close, this is a really good option for that. So when I think of use cases, I would automatically disqualify anything serious. Home defense, truck gun, duty, anything like that would be automatically disqualified for something like this. So what I think it's really good for is Christmas is coming up. And if you know somebody who's really young or somebody who's just getting into shooting and they don't necessarily know what to get, whether to spend, $800 on an aim point or whether or not they want like a Vortex Razor HD, and they're just kind of getting into things. This can be a really good scope as sort of a training scope, so you can put it on like a kid's 1022 and get them used to using an LPVO, especially if you're going to be buying them or upgrading the scope in the future. So there are a lot of uses for it, and I think like a first scope on like for somebody who's training or just practicing or just wants to see if this is something that's good for them. Again, it only costs $100 with a lifetime warranty, so it's not like you're going to be out all that much money, and you do get a really good 1x, which I think is the biggest learning curve on an LPVO is being fast up close with it, because of course on a red dot it's just open, and so there's no eye box, there's no eye relief. You can just put your head anywhere behind the optic and you'll be able to see through it and see your reticle and see the target, which is different on an LPVO. So for a training scope, or if you just have your third, fourth, fifth gun laying around and you just want to throw something on it that will do the job and is fairly high quality, like I said, as good of glass as any of those other scopes behind me, which again, most of them are much more expensive than this optic, it will absolutely work for something like that. I don't believe it's a serious optic in any way, and I do not recommend using it for any of those applications. I don't really recommend it for hunting either, just because for a little bit more money, well, for about double the money, you can get a nicer scope, for about 3 times the money, you can get a scope with a lot more features, more magnification range, better reticles, wind holdovers, BDCs, all that sort of fun stuff that you're not going to find in this price range. One thing I do want to mention is that towards the beginning, when I first started doing like gun stuff on YouTube, like about 2 years ago now, for $100, if you were going to buy a $100 optic, you almost had no options in terms of an LPVO, a cheap LPVO. There were a few, I think maybe the UTG was around them, but they were about $180, $200 at that point. So we've come a long way, and the price has come down quite a bit on budget LPVOs, because this is about as budget as possible for an LPVO, and it's still fairly high quality, though I did mention that the parallax on it did shift after the double drop test. So that's about it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As I mentioned in the beginning, I believe that this will be up for giveaway on my Subscribe page if you guys want to hop over there for as little as $2 a month. On top of that, I think we'll be throwing in the 175. This is the AIM Sports mount. I've been using it quite a bit, and it seems to hold up fairly well. I've used it on 308s and 760x39s and 5.56, and it's worked very, very well. So I think we're going to combo this for next month's giveaway. So if you want to hop in there, that will be on my Subscribe. But other than that, like, share, and subscribe. You can buy steel plates from me if you need targets. We have a bunch of more targets coming in stock, hopefully very, very soon, and we'll be shipping those out to you guys very quickly. So that's about it for the video, guys. Like I said, let me know if there's anything else you want to add to this. Better budget LPVOs, you can leave that in the description, and I will possibly take a look at them in the future. But like I said, that's about it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace off.